The last shift. The dinner rush was in full swing when it happened. Elena Varga moved through the dining room of La Maison Belle with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself useful without being seen. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light. Soft jazz played beneath the murmur of conversation. She balanced 3 plates along her arm, navigating between tables with practiced grace. At table 9, a group of Italian tourists had been struggling with the menu. Elena had stopped to help, her voice low and warm as she translated their questions, explained the chef's specialties, shared a small joke that made the older woman in the group laugh. It was nothing. It was everything. It was the kind of moment that made the long shifts bearable. She never saw Richard Hale approaching. "You're done." His voice cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Elena turned, plates still balanced, and found the restaurant owner standing 3 feet away. His suit was immaculate. His expression was ice. "I've warned you about talking too much." He said it loud enough for every table to hear. "Get your things. You're finished here." Elena stood perfectly still. The tray didn't waver. Her face remained calm, almost serene. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen her hands trembling almost imperceptibly against the porcelain. The Italian tourists exchanged confused glances. A child at a nearby table stopped mid-bite. In the corner booth, an elderly Chinese woman, a regular named Mrs. Chen, lowered her teacup and watched with eyes that missed nothing. Elena set down the plates gently. She reached behind her back, untied her apron, and folded it with careful precision. Then she placed it on the nearest table and walked toward the door. She said nothing as she left. But silence, as Richard Hale would learn, can be louder than any language. What he didn't know, Richard Hale saw a waitress who talked too much. He never wondered why she spoke so many languages in the first place. 10 years earlier, Elena Varga had stood before lecture halls in Budapest, teaching linguistics to eager university students. She held 2 advanced degrees. She had published papers on the evolution of Romance languages. She spoke 7 languages fluently: Hungarian, English, French, German, Russian, Mandarin, and Spanish, not because she had to, but because she loved the way words could build bridges between strangers. Then the political unrest came. The borders tightened. The threats arrived at her door. She fled with 2 suitcases and her mother's photograph. In America, her credentials meant nothing. Her degrees didn't transfer. Her accent marked her as foreign, her age marked her as unhireable, and her qualifications made employers nervous rather than impressed. So she cleaned office buildings, she washed dishes, she waited tables and smiled politely when customers spoke slowly, assuming she couldn't understand. Her apartment was small, a single room with a narrow bed and a kitchen that barely fit 1 person. But the walls were lined with books, dictionaries in 7 languages, their spines soft from use. Grammar guides filled with her handwritten notes. A photograph of her mother sat on the windowsill, watching over everything. At night, while washing dishes, Elena whispered verb conjugations to herself. French, German, Mandarin. The words kept her sharp, kept her ready. She wasn't broken, she was waiting. Elena had rebuilt her life from silence. She had no idea that silence was about to speak. The regular Mrs. Lucille Chen had eaten at La Maison Belle every Thursday evening for 6 years. Not for the food, though it was fine enough, but for Elena. At 78, Lucille had outlived her husband, her 2 brothers, and most of her friends. She had spent 40 years as a court reporter, transcribing testimonies and verdicts, watching justice unfold and sometimes fail. Retirement had brought silence, and silence had brought loneliness. But Elena always remembered. Oolong tea, steeped exactly 4 minutes, served in a porcelain cup. A warm smile that never felt rushed. And most importantly, Elena listened. She listened to stories about Lucille's late husband, about her garden, about the grandchildren who called less often than they should. In a world that had started to look past her, Elena still saw her. The day after the firing, Lucille dialed the restaurant, Richard Hale answered on the third ring, his voice polished and indifferent. Lucille stated her complaint calmly. A loyal customer. A dedicated employee. A public humiliation that was entirely unnecessary. Richard's response came wrapped in condescension. "I appreciate your concern, ma'am, but she was just a waitress. We'll find another one." The line went quiet for a moment. "No," Lucille said, her voice turning to steel. "She was the only reason I came." She hung up before he could respond. Lucille set the phone down slowly and looked out her window at the morning light. She said nothing more. But she didn't forget. Mrs. Chen had seen a lot in 78 years. She knew when a wrong was waiting to be made right. A knock on the door. 3 weeks passed, and Elena learned what it meant to be invisible in a different way. She applied to 14 jobs: administrative assistant, library clerk, hotel receptionist. Each interview followed the same pattern: polite smiles that faded when they heard her accent, careful questions about her age, puzzled frowns at a resume that listed university professorships and published research. "You're overqualified," they said, as if excellence were a flaw. "We're looking for someone who will stay long-term," they said, as if she hadn't already proven she could endure. Her savings dwindled. The rent notice sat unopened on her kitchen counter. Some nights, she read her dictionaries just to remember who she used to be. Then came the knock. Elena opened her door to find a woman in a navy blazer holding a manila folder. She introduced herself as a coordinator from the Federal District Court. "Elena Varga?" The woman glanced at her paperwork. "You registered with a translation agency several years ago. We've been trying to reach you." Elena blinked. She had almost forgotten. The registration had been a hopeful gesture during her first year in America, back when she still believed her skills might matter. "We have a complex case beginning next month," the woman continued. "International fraud. Witnesses from 4 countries, 7 languages involved." She paused. "We need someone who can handle all of them. Your file says you qualify." Elena's heart tightened. It had been so long since anyone had asked her to be more than invisible. "I don't know if I—" She stopped. Her eyes drifted to the windowsill, where her mother's photograph sat in the morning light. That quiet, steady gaze. The face of a woman who had never let fear make her small. Elena turned back. "I'll do it." She didn't ask who the defendant was. She wouldn't find out until she walked into that courtroom. The courtroom door. The federal courthouse stood like a monument to things Elena had almost stopped believing in: justice, truth, accountability. She arrived early, wearing a modest gray blazer she had pressed twice the night before. Her posture was straight, her steps measured. But beneath the calm exterior, her heart drummed against her ribs. It had been years since she had used her skills professionally. Years since anyone had trusted her with something that mattered. A clerk led her through security, down a long marble corridor, and toward the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B. "The trial begins in 20 minutes, he said. "You'll be seated near the witness stand." Elena nodded and stepped inside. The room was larger than she had expected. Tall ceilings, wooden benches arranged in solemn rows. Attorneys shuffled papers at their respective tables while the gallery slowly filled with observers and reporters. Then her eyes reached the defendant's table. She froze. Richard Hale sat there in a charcoal suit, his posture relaxed, his expression unbothered. The man who had humiliated her in front of a room full of strangers. The man who had erased her livelihood with a single sentence. Federal charges. Money laundering through international shell companies. Fraud targeting immigrant investors. His eyes drifted across the room, scanning, assessing, and landed briefly on her. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then his lip curled into a faint smirk. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. Dismissive, uninterested. He didn't recognize her. To Richard Hale, she was no one. A background figure. Another face in a room full of people who existed only to serve his narrative. He looked right through her, the way he always had. He had no idea she was about to become the most important person in that room. The first witness. The first witness was a woman named Ingrid Baumann, 53 years old, silver hair pinned back, hands clasped tight in her lap as she took the stand. She spoke only German. Richard Hale's defense attorney rose immediately, his voice smooth with practiced concern. Your Honor, we were not informed that testimony would be given in German. We request a delay to secure a certified interpreter. My client's right to a fair trial. Ms. Varga. Judge Adrienne Carter's voice cut through the performance. She turned toward Elena with calm authority. Are you certified in German? The courtroom waited. Elena stood slowly. She could feel Richard's gaze on her now, no longer dismissive, curious, uncertain. She answered in flawless Hochdeutsch, her accent precise, her tone steady. Yes, Your Honor. I taught German at university level for 6 years. I am certified by the American Translators Association. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The defense attorney's mouth opened, then closed. Judge Carter nodded. Proceed. Elena turned toward Ingrid Baumann and spoke gently in German, explaining the process. The older woman's eyes softened with visible relief. Finally, someone who understood. Then the testimony began. Ingrid spoke quietly at first, her voice trembling. She described how she had been approached by representatives of Richard Hale's company, how they had promised safe investments, guaranteed returns, how she had trusted them with her family's savings, 40 years of her husband's pension set aside for their retirement. They took everything, Ingrid whispered. And when I called for answers, no one would speak to me. Elena translated every word. Her voice remained calm and precise, but something shifted in her tone, a softness, a reverence for the pain being spoken aloud. She did not embellish. She did not dramatize. She simply carried the truth from one language to another with the dignity it deserved. Across the room, Richard Hale sat motionless. The smirk was gone. The jury watched Elena now, not just the witness. That was the first language. There were 6 more to come, and each one brought Richard Hale closer to the truth he thought he'd buried. 7 voices, 1 truth. The trial stretched across 5 days, and with each passing hour, Elena became the voice the courtroom could not ignore. A French accountant named Michel Dupont testified on day 2. He had invested his daughter's college fund based on promises made in a Paris hotel room. Elena translated his quiet anger, his disbelief, the shame he carried for trusting strangers with his child's future. On day 3, a Hungarian couple took the stand together. They had fled their homeland decades ago, just as Elena had. They had believed in the American dream, and Richard Hale's company had sold them a version of it that existed only on paper. Elena spoke their language with the tenderness of shared history, and the wife wept when she realized someone finally understood. A Chinese businessman from Shanghai described wiring money that vanished within weeks. A Mexican grandmother spoke of borrowing against her home. A Russian engineer recounted losing everything he had saved since arriving in America 15 years ago. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Elena moved between languages like water flowing through rivers, French to Hungarian to Mandarin to Spanish to Russian, never stumbling, never rushing. Her voice carried each testimony with precision and grace, honoring the weight of every word. The jury watched her now as much as they watched the witnesses. On the 4th day, Richard Hale's attorney rose with visible frustration. Your Honor, I must object to this interpreter's continued involvement. Her qualifications have not been independently verified. We have no way of knowing. Judge Carter raised a hand. Ms. Varga, would you care to present your credentials for the record? Elena stood. She did not hesitate. I hold a doctorate in linguistics from Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. I have a master's degree in comparative language studies. I taught at the university level for 11 years and published 9 peer-reviewed papers on language acquisition and translation theory. I am certified in all 7 languages by internationally recognized institutions, the courtroom murmured. The defense attorney sat down slowly. And across the room, Richard Hale stared at her, truly stared, for the first time. His lips parted, his face drained of color. He recognized her now, the waitress, the woman he had fired for talking too much, the nobody he had humiliated without a second thought. For the first time, Richard Hale looked at her, not past her. And what he saw was everything he had underestimated. The recognition in Richard Hale's eyes quickly curdled into something else. Desperation. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently. The lawyer's expression shifted from skepticism to calculation. Within moments, he was on his feet. Your Honor, I request an immediate sidebar. Judge Carter studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Both attorneys approached the bench, their voices low but intense. Elena remained standing near the witness box, her hands folded, her face calm. She could not hear the words, but she understood what was happening. Richard was trying to remove her. After several minutes, Judge Carter gestured for the attorneys to step back. She turned her gaze directly to Elena. Ms. Varga, it has been brought to my attention that you were previously employed by the defendant and that your employment was terminated. Given this history, the defense argues you may harbor personal bias. The judge paused. I want to hear from you directly. Can you remain impartial in this proceeding? The courtroom held its breath. Elena met the judge's eyes without wavering. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. Your Honor, I am not here for him. I am here for the people whose voices he tried to erase. People who came to this country believing their words would matter. She paused. I will translate their truth exactly as they speak it, nothing more, nothing less. That is my only role. Silence stretched across the room. Judge Carter studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. The interpreter will continue. A sharp crack echoed through the courtroom. Richard Hale had slammed his palm against the defense table, his composure finally fracturing. His attorney placed a warning hand on his arm, but the damage was done. The jury had seen it. He had silenced her once. Now she was the only voice the jury could hear. The final witness nearly didn't make it to the stand. Her name was Valentina Orloff, 81 years old. Her hands shook as she gripped the wooden railing. Her frail body wrapped in a coat too heavy for the season, as though she needed its weight to hold her together. She spoke only Russian, and barely above a whisper. The prosecutor began his questions, but Valentina's eyes darted around the courtroom, overwhelmed. Her breathing quickened. She looked like a woman on the verge of disappearing. Elena rose quietly. She approached the witness stand with slow, careful steps and knelt slightly so their eyes were level. She spoke in soft Russian, her voice gentle as a lullaby. You are safe here. Take your time. I will carry your words. Valentina's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and clutched Elena's hand like a lifeline. Then she began to speak. Through Elena's translation, the story emerged. Valentina had lost her husband's pension, every dollar he had saved across 40 years of factory work. Then she lost her home. She had come to America to be near her grandchildren, and now she had nothing to leave them. I did not come for money, Valentina whispered. I came because he should have to look at what he did. The jury sat motionless. One woman pressed a hand to her mouth, another wiped her eyes. Across the room, Richard Hale stared at the floor. For a man who built his empire on image, this was the moment it shattered. Not with a scream, but with an old woman's whisper. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Elena sat alone on a wooden bench in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her blazer was wrinkled now, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion, but her posture remained straight. Her breathing remained steady. She had done what she came to do. The rest was beyond her control. Footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor. Elena looked up to find Mrs. Chen walking toward her, moving slowly but with unmistakable purpose. The elderly woman lowered herself onto the bench and sat in silence for a long moment. Then she reached over and took Elena's hand. "I knew," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I always knew you were more than what he saw." Elena's throat tightened. For 5 days, she had translated the grief of strangers without breaking. She had faced Richard Hale's stare without flinching. She had carried the weight of 7 languages and countless stories with steady hands. But now, in the quiet of the hallway, her eyes filled with tears for the first time. "I just wanted to be useful again," she whispered. Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand gently. "You were never anything less." The courtroom doors slowly opened, and with them, the final chapter. The jury filed back into the courtroom with solemn faces. Elena stood near the interpreter's chair, her hands clasped in front of her. Mrs. Chen watched from the gallery, her fingers pressed together as if in prayer. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of everything that had been spoken over the past 5 days. The foreman rose. The judge asked the question, "Guilty on all counts." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ripples spread across the courtroom, gasps, murmurs, the scratch of reporters' pens. Richard Hale sat frozen, his face blank and hollow, as though the verdict had carved something out of him. 2 officers approached. Richard rose slowly, mechanically, as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. They began to lead him toward the side door. Then he stopped. He turned and looked at Elena, truly looked at her, for what would be the last time. His mouth opened slightly, as if words were forming somewhere deep inside him. But nothing came out. Elena met his gaze calmly. She did not gloat. She did not look away. She simply stood there, unbroken, steady as she had always been. The truth had spoken for itself. Through her. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted above the noise. "How does it feel to take him down?" Elena paused on the steps. The autumn wind stirred her hair. "I didn't take anyone down," she said quietly. "I just translated." But justice, as it turned out, needed no translation. 3 months later, Elena received a letter on official courthouse stationery. The Federal District Court offered her a full-time position as a senior interpreter. Benefits included, respect guaranteed. She read the letter twice before setting it down, her hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. She accepted. Mrs. Chen insisted on celebrating. Her apartment was small and warm, filled with the scent of jasmine tea and vanilla cake. A single candle flickered on the table between them. "For your new beginning," Mrs. Chen said softly. Elena smiled, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. But the courthouse was not enough. Elena wanted to give back what had been given to her, a voice when it mattered most. She began teaching night classes at a community center downtown, adult immigrants learning English, people like her, starting over, rebuilding syllable by syllable. On the first night, she stood before a room of uncertain faces and spoke slowly. "Your voice matters," she told them, "even when they tell you it doesn't. Especially then." She had been silenced once. Now she spent her days making sure others never would be. Morning light spilled through the courthouse windows as Elena walked through the doors, her steps steady, her head held high. The marble halls hummed with quiet purpose. Attorneys passed with briefcases. Clerks hurried toward courtrooms. And near the entrance, a young woman in a gray uniform mopped the floor in slow, invisible circles. Elena stopped. "Buenos dias," she said softly. The young woman looked up, startled. For a moment she seemed unsure if the greeting was meant for her. Then Elena smiled, warm, unhurried, real. The woman smiled back. Elena nodded gently and continued walking, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Another day awaited, more voices to carry, more truths to honor. She had not found revenge. She had found something better, restoration, dignity, purpose, the quiet power of being truly seen. He thought she talked too much. Turns out she was the only one worth listening to. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.